Turnbull government is under huge pressure to cut immigration, now running at an incredible 240,000 people a year. That's more than the population of Hobart every year. And polls show the public is sick of the results. Crowded roads, higher house prices in the cities and the rest. So last week, the government announced, yes, it had finally listened and had cut the permanent immigration intake by 21,000 people a year.
So that's actually the lowest it's been in 10 years.
But is the impression you were invited to have actually right? Has the government truly cut immigration, or did it just trick you? Joining me a short while ago for a fact check was Leith Van Onselen, an economist who has worked for the Australian Victorian Treasuries and is now co-founder of macrobusiness.com.au. Macrobusiness.com.au. He's done a lot of research on immigration. Leith Van Onselen, thank you so much for joining me. OK, let's go through what the government's been claiming. First of all, it's making a big fuss about having cut permanent immigration by 20,000 people over the last year by being tougher on people applying to come in. Is that a genuine cut?
Well, they did cut the permanent migrant intake by 21,000, and that takes it down to around 180,000 once you include the humanitarian intake. But there is a little bit of fiddling going on here. At the same time as the permanent migrant intake fell by 21,000, the government's actually increased so-called bridging visas by 40,000 over the past year. Now, bridging visas are visas given to migrants who've got a substantive claim. For example, they're awaiting permanent residency. So while the permanent migrant intake has fallen, the actual migrant queue in Australia has arguably gone up. And that's why the net overseas migration is still stuck at a turbocharged 240,000 people per year. And it's also why the federal budget projects that net overseas migration will stay at these elevated levels for the next 3 years.
And 240,000 is more than the city of Hobart. The 40,000 extra
Bridging
visas, people on a bridging visa, can they normally rely on sooner or later being allowed to stay? As in, can we actually treat them as pretty much permanent immigrants?
Well, it's hard to say. They're basically waiting, I guess, on a sort of long-term temporary visa while they await claims for, say, permanent residency. It's kind of one of these how long's a piece of string situations. But I will add that bridging visas have gone up 90,000 since 2014. Now, that would suggest that they are staying for an extended period of time.
They're not going home anytime soon.
That's right, yeah. So they are here for an extended period of time. Whether that ends up being permanent is another matter, but they are staying within Australia for an extended period of time.
So the government's saying we've cut 20,000, look over here, meanwhile over there there's an extra 40,000. They're not serious. The other thing about this is we've had the Prime Minister say, well, yes, we've just hit 25 million, a population of 25 million, much faster than was predicted only a few years ago. But don't worry, that also includes tourists. Here he is.
Prime Minister, we're about to hit 25 million a couple of decades early. It does beg the question, has the government lost control of migration?
Well, we're having more babies than we thought we'd have. In 2002, our birth rate has increased significantly from what was forecast. And we also have a lot more students, foreign students, which is one of our biggest exports, and a lot more foreign tourists.
So the prediction was 25 million would be the population. We've hit that really early. But the categories you've just mentioned include things like students, and I think you said tourists. That's not part of population. So how did
they are. In terms of your total population, that's the number of people that are in Australia at any given time.
So when we say 25 million, that includes all the tourists?
Everyone, that's right.
Leith Van Onselen, is the Prime Minister correct?
No, he's been very loose with the truth here. The 25 million figure is actually the resident population of Australia. And to be classified as a resident, you have to have been in Australia for 12 months out of 18 months. So obviously short-term tourists won't be included in that. I'll also add that net tourism flows are actually reducing Australia's population pressures. That's because at any given time there are more Australians travelling overseas than there are international tourists travelling within Australia. So he's been very loose with the truth.
So this really is curious to me. So the government's been making a big deal over the last 2 weeks or 3 weeks saying, listen, we've got the message on immigration, we are cracking down, but it's not.
Yeah, it does seem to be a little bit of a distraction, a smokescreen, a bait and switch, if you like to call it that. And of course, they've now pivoted the whole debate towards pushing migrants to the regions.
What's wrong with that?
Well, I mean, in theory, it's good, but how do you do it? Are we going to put up migrant-proof fences? Are we going to put up electronic tags? It's not a particularly workable solution, and it is a bit of a distraction to distract people away from the fundamental issues which is that the migrant intake, which is running at over triple the historical average, needs to come down.
Well, you now have some pressure on the government. There's not just been the usual suspects saying cut immigration. There's also been now backbenchers like Dean Smith. Now, before, when it was Tony Abbott, a few months ago, the government rubbished him. Now that it's Dean Smith, whose private members bill gave us gay marriage, for instance, the government's saying, yes, interesting topic about cutting immigration and then these deceits. Dean Smith is saying what we need is a big debate and a big white paper and all this sort of study and inquiry into immigration. Do we need that? Because I would have thought it's pretty obvious that we're getting too many people come in. It's historically high. It needs to be cut. What's the debate?
Well, we certainly do need a population policy. We don't have one. But instead of wasting a year's time going through this whole Senate charade, which, let's face it, will probably lead to the same situation we've already got, because nobody on either side of Parliament actually wants to cut the migration intake, how about we just have a population plebiscite at the upcoming federal election and let the Australian people decide how big they want the nation to become, and then those answers can then inform the policy around immigration. Look, we've just had...
It's not going to happen, Leith, because this is one of those issues that the politicians will not allow to the public to have a say in if they can help it. But tell me, why is it that the big two, Labor and Liberal, are so determined to have such amazingly high immigration levels when the public's against it and the business lobbyists come in with, clinking their coins saying it's all good for us?
Well, I think you touched on it right there at the end. Both major parties are effectively beholden to business. And in Labor's case, Labor's beholden to the union, which is really the construction union, which benefits from big migration.
Because they're building stuff.
That's right, yeah. So obviously more people means more construction, which is good for the CFMEU, which is why Labor and the ACTU likes big migration.
What about the rest of us? Aren't we better off?
No, certainly not. And we've had 5 recent opinion polls. The last 5 opinion polls have all shown overwhelmingly that the majority of Australians want lower immigration. So the question is, when will our politicians listen and give us the population plebiscite that we all demand and we all deserve?
And hopefully feed us fewer deceits, to put it most politely. Leith Van Onselen, thank you so much indeed for your time.
Thanks, Andrew.